Welcome to Heartline Stories. Today's story follows Jacob's wedding. Jacob thought his wedding day would be perfect until his ex, Emily, showed up. But it wasn't just Emily. She brought someone with her, a girl who looked exactly like her. Shocked and confused, Jacob couldn't understand why Emily had kept this secret. Who was the girl? Why didn't Jacob know about her? As the day unfolded, Jacob realized this wasn't just a wedding. It was the beginning of a mystery that could change everything. What was Emily hiding? And how would this surprise affect Jacob's future with Sarah? The answers would be more than he ever expected, and let us know where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. Jacob Roberts was a successful millionaire. He had everything anyone could ever want: money, fame, and a beautiful mansion on the hill. But there was one thing he didn't have: true love. Jacob had been married once, but things didn't work out. He and his ex-wife, Emily, had parted ways years ago, and since then, Jacob had focused on his career. But now, after years of being single, Jacob was ready to marry again. He had found someone special: Sarah, a kind, funny woman he had met through friends. They had been dating for a while, and Jacob knew she was the one he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. The wedding was set for a beautiful Saturday afternoon, and Jacob had planned every detail down to the last flower. The guest list included all of Jacob's friends, family, and business partners. But there was one name Jacob had hesitated to include: Emily. He hadn't spoken to her much since their divorce. They hadn't ended things badly, but they had simply grown apart over time. Jacob wasn't sure if inviting her was a good idea, but after thinking it over, he decided to send Emily an invitation, just to be polite. He didn't expect her to come, but he thought it would be the right thing to do. The big day arrived, and the mansion was filled with flowers, laughter, and excitement. Jacob was standing at the altar waiting for Sarah to walk down the aisle. His heart was pounding with joy. Everything felt perfect. As the music began to play, Jacob turned to see Sarah walking toward him. She looked beautiful in her white gown, her smile lighting up the whole room. Jacob's heart swelled with happiness as she reached the altar, and they exchanged loving smiles. But just as the ceremony was about to begin, there was a sudden hush in the room. The doors to the back of the hall opened, and Emily stepped inside. Jacob froze. "Emily," he whispered to himself, his mind racing. He hadn't expected her to actually come. She was wearing a simple blue dress, her brown hair styled neatly, and she had a warm smile on her face. She walked down the aisle, her eyes meeting Jacob's for a moment, before she turned to take a seat. Jacob felt a little uncomfortable, but he smiled politely and went back to focusing on Sarah. Emily wasn't here to cause trouble, he reminded himself. She was just being friendly. But something was off. Emily was sitting quietly, but she wasn't alone. As the ceremony continued, Jacob couldn't help but notice something strange. Emily wasn't alone. She was sitting next to a young woman, a girl who looked exactly like her, like a younger version of Emily. The same brown hair, the same bright smile, and the same sparkling eyes. Jacob tried to focus on Sarah, but his eyes kept drifting back to Emily and the mysterious woman. Who was she? Why did she look so much like Emily? Finally, the ceremony came to an end, and Jacob and Sarah were pronounced husband and wife. They kissed, and the guests cheered. But Jacob's mind was still racing. He walked down the aisle with Sarah, trying to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He glanced at Emily, who was now talking to the mysterious woman. They were laughing together like old friends. Jacob felt a pang of curiosity. After the ceremony, Jacob and Sarah moved to the reception hall. It was filled with laughter, music, and dancing. But Jacob's eyes kept searching for Emily and the girl. What was going on? Finally, Sarah noticed his distracted look. "Jacob, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice soft. Jacob hesitated before answering. "It's just Emily, and that girl she's with. She looks so much like her." "It's strange." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You mean Emily brought someone who looks like her? How odd." Jacob nodded, his curiosity growing. "I have to find out who she is." Later that evening, as the guests mingled and enjoyed the food, Jacob found Emily standing near the punch bowl, talking to the mysterious woman. He took a deep breath and walked over to them. "Emily," Jacob said, his voice warm but curious, I'm glad you could make it today, but, I have to ask, who is this? Emily smiled, looking at the girl next to her. Oh, Jacob, this is Maya. You probably didn't know, but she's my daughter. Jacob blinked. Your daughter? But she looks exactly like you. Emily chuckled. Yes, she does, doesn't she? Maya is my daughter, but she's also a very special part of my life. I didn't think you'd recognize her, but she grew up so quickly. She's almost like my twin, isn't she? Jacob stood frozen. Maya? Emily had a daughter? He had no idea. He hadn't seen Emily in years, and he never knew she had children. But the more he looked at Maya, the more he could see the resemblance. Maya wasn't just Emily's daughter. She looked like a younger version of her, almost as if she could have been Emily's twin sister. Wait, Jacob said, trying to process everything. Why didn't you tell me? I had no idea you had a daughter. Emily smiled softly. I didn't want to surprise you. Maya and I have our own story. She's been living with me for the past few years. I didn't know how to bring it up, especially since things ended with us the way they did. Jacob's mind was racing. He was shocked, confused, and a little overwhelmed. Emily had a daughter, someone who looked just like her, and now she was here at his wedding, sitting right in front of him. Jacob stood there, frozen, trying to process everything Emily had just told him. He had no idea she had a daughter, and certainly not someone who looked so much like her. Maya, the girl standing beside Emily, smiled warmly at him, but Jacob could barely manage a smile in return. His mind was racing, and he felt suddenly unsure of everything. So, Maya, Jacob started, his voice a little shaky. How old are you? Maya laughed lightly, as if she had been asked that question many times before. I'm 18, she said, but I swear, I get mistaken for being older. It's the way I look, I guess. Jacob nodded, still struggling to wrap his head around the situation. Emily's daughter was 18, which meant she was born just a few years after he and Emily had gotten married. But why had Emily never mentioned her? Why had she kept this part of her life so hidden? Before Jacob could ask another question, Sarah walked up beside him, taking his hand. She smiled at Emily and Maya, but Jacob could tell she was a little uncomfortable with the situation. She had never met Emily before, and now suddenly, Emily's daughter was here at their wedding, adding to the confusion. Hi, I'm Sarah, Sarah said, extending her hand toward Emily and Maya. I'm Jacob's wife. Maya smiled and shook Sarah's hand. Nice to meet you, Sarah. I've heard a lot about you. Jacob looked between the two women, feeling an unexpected wave of tension. Emily, however, seemed completely at ease, as if this was all normal. You've heard about Sarah? Jacob asked, his voice surprised. He hadn't realized Emily and Maya had been talking about Sarah before the wedding. Oh yeah, Maya said with a mischievous grin. Mom likes to talk about how happy you two are. She's really glad you found someone so special. Emily nodded, her eyes softening. It's true, I'm happy for you, Jacob. I really am. You deserve to be happy. Jacob felt a strange mix of emotions. He had always thought of Emily as someone from his past, someone he had moved on from. But now, standing here at his wedding with Sarah and hearing Emily talk about their past so casually, Jacob felt a little lost. He had invited Emily out of politeness, but now he realized there was so much he didn't know about her. And there was something about Maya's presence that felt like a jarring reminder of everything he had left behind. As the evening wore on, Jacob couldn't help but watch Emily and Maya from a distance. They seemed so close, sharing inside jokes and stories from their life together. Maya was outgoing and confident, and Jacob could see how much she adored her mother. He wondered how Emily had managed to keep Maya's existence a secret for so long. Had it been deliberate, or had it just never come up? Later that night, after the guests had eaten and the music had started, Jacob found himself alone in a quiet corner of the mansion. He needed time to think. The events of the day had been overwhelming, and his mind was full of questions. He was startled when Emily quietly walked up behind him. She smiled warmly, but Jacob could tell she was just as uneasy as he was. Jacob, can we talk? Emily asked softly. Jacob nodded, gesturing toward the empty chairs. Yeah, of course. There's a lot to talk about, I guess. Emily sat down next to him. I know this is a lot to take in. I'm sorry for the surprise, but I wanted you to meet Maya. She's my daughter, and I didn't want you to think she was some stranger at your wedding." Jacob rubbed his temples. I just, I didn't know. You never mentioned her. I never knew you had a daughter." Emily looked down for a moment, her expression unreadable. "I know, I should have told you sooner, but after everything with us, it just never felt like the right time. I didn't know how to bring it up." Jacob's heart softened. He had never been angry with Emily, but he couldn't help feeling hurt by the silence. They had been married, shared a life together, and yet Emily had kept such a big part of her life hidden from him. He had always thought they had a clean break, but now with Maya here, it felt like there were unfinished chapters from their past he had never even known about. "Why didn't you tell me, Emily?" Jacob asked, his voice quieter now. "You were my wife. We were supposed to share everything." Emily sighed deeply, looking regretful. "I didn't want to complicate things. After our divorce, I didn't know how to explain Maya to you. I knew it would make things more difficult, and I didn't want to make you feel like you had to take on more responsibility. Maya's dad and I had our own issues, and after everything was over, I just focused on raising her. I didn't want to drag you back into it." Jacob nodded, his mind still spinning. He understood what Emily was saying, but it didn't make the situation any easier to accept. "I get it," Jacob said, though his tone was distant. "But now it feels like I'm finding out everything all at once. I don't know how to process this. I don't know what to think." Emily reached out and placed a hand on his arm. "I never wanted to hurt you, Jacob. I'm sorry. I didn't know how to balance everything. But Maya is a big part of my life, and I wanted you to meet her. I thought it was time." Jacob took a deep breath. "I just don't know what to do with all of this. I invited you here for the wedding, but I didn't expect this surprise. I don't know if it changes anything, but it's definitely a lot to handle." Emily looked at him with soft eyes. "I don't want to cause trouble for you. I'm happy for you, Jacob. You found someone special in Sarah, and I don't want to mess that up." Jacob gave her a small, uncertain smile. "I don't think you're trying to mess anything up, Emily, but I need some time to process all of this. Maya, your daughter, it's a lot. I didn't expect to be blindsided today." Emily nodded, understanding. "Take all the time you need. I'm not here to disrupt your life. I just wanted you to know the truth." Jacob sat silently for a moment, letting Emily's words sink in. The air between them felt heavy, full of unspoken things. He had always thought of his life as moving forward, but today it felt like he was revisiting a past he hadn't fully understood. Emily had brought Maya into his world, into his wedding day, and he wasn't sure how to process it. After a long pause, Jacob finally spoke. "I never thought I'd be in this situation, Emily. I invited you here out of kindness, out of respect, but I didn't expect to meet someone who looks so much like you. It's overwhelming." Emily nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "I know, Jacob. I wasn't trying to overwhelm you, but Maya is part of me, and she's part of my life. I thought it was time for you to know. Maybe I should have told you sooner, but it didn't feel right when we were together. And after everything, I didn't know how to bring it up." Jacob took a deep breath, trying to put his thoughts together. He had always tried to be in control of his emotions, but today everything felt out of his grasp. "I guess I've just always seen our past as something that's behind me. I didn't expect it to show up like this," Jacob admitted, his voice softer than usual. Emily gave him a sad smile. "I understand, and I'm sorry if this is too much for you, but I never wanted to hide Maya from you. It just wasn't the right time." Jacob paused, taking in her words. He had always respected Emily, and he realized that despite their past, they had both moved on in different ways. Emily had a daughter, a new life, and now Jacob had his own future with Sarah. His feelings were a mix of nostalgia, confusion, and something else, something he couldn't quite name. He turned to look at Sarah, who had been quietly watching from a distance. Sarah had always been supportive, but Jacob knew this was a lot for her to absorb too. "I should talk to Sarah," Jacob said, standing up. "She deserves to know everything, especially since she's now part of my life." Emily nodded. "Of course. I think that's the right thing to do. Jacob walked over to Sarah, who was talking with some of the guests near the dance floor. When she saw him approach, she smiled, but there was a hint of concern in her eyes. Hey, you okay? She asked, her voice gentle. Jacob nodded, but he could see the question in her eyes. I need to talk to you, Sarah. There's something I need to explain. They stepped away from the crowd into a quiet corner of the reception hall. Jacob explained everything about Emily's daughter, Maya, the similarities between them, and how Emily had kept her life with Maya a secret for all those years. Sarah listened patiently, her expression thoughtful. When Jacob finished, she didn't speak right away. Instead, she took a deep breath and finally said, I can't imagine how strange this must feel, Jacob, but I think you're handling it well. You've always been honest with me, and I appreciate that. Jacob let out a sigh of relief. I didn't want to keep anything from you. I know it's a lot to take in, but I didn't want this to come between us. Sarah smiled softly and placed a hand on his arm. I'm not upset, Jacob. I just want us to move forward. And that means dealing with the unexpected, like today. But I believe we can handle it together. Jacob felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He had been nervous about how Sarah would react, but her calm, supportive nature reassured him. They were a team. As the evening wore on, Jacob found himself surrounded by both old faces and new ones. Emily and Maya had joined the guests, and Jacob noticed that Maya was laughing with some of his old friends. She seemed to fit in effortlessly, just like her mother. Jacob realized that, despite the shock of seeing them today, Emily had never meant to cause trouble. She had simply wanted to be honest with him about her life. When the evening ended, Jacob and Sarah stood together, ready to leave the mansion and start their new life as husband and wife. As they were about to head out, Emily approached Jacob one last time. Thank you for letting me be here today, Jacob, she said softly. I hope you and Sarah find happiness together. I just wanted to share my truth with you. Jacob smiled warmly. Thank you for coming, Emily. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm glad we can both move forward in our own ways. Emily nodded, a small tear in her eye. I'm proud of you, Jacob. You've done well. With that, Emily and Maya left the mansion, and Jacob and Sarah turned toward the future, hand in hand. Months passed, and Jacob and Sarah settled into their new life together. They continued to build their future, now stronger than ever. Although the wedding day had been full of surprises, it had also reminded Jacob of something important. Life was unpredictable, but it was those unexpected moments that made it special. As for Emily and Maya, they stayed in touch with Jacob occasionally, but their paths had diverged. Emily was happy with her daughter, and Jacob was content with his new life. They had all found their own way forward, and Jacob realized that sometimes the past could bring surprises, but it didn't have to define the future. And as for Sarah, she was by his side every step of the way, helping him navigate the twists and turns of life together.